It was a quiet morning deep in the Appalachian forest when two canine German shepherds stopped dead in their tracks and refused to move. Their handler called for them gently, but they would not budge. Their ears were raised, their bodies frozen. Something ahead had changed the air. Then one of them growled, not in fear, but in warning. What they found moments later would shake the entire search team to the core. If this moment gripped you, do not forget to subscribe. These true inspired stories may start with an animal, but they end by changing lives. The dogs lunged forward, pulling their handler through thick underbrush. The terrain was steep, the trail barely visible, but the shepherds were trained for this. They were search and rescue champions, silent warriors built to track, sniff, and protect. But nothing had prepared the team for what they would see when the dogs reached the clearing. There, under a fading pine tree, was a man, chained. His uniform was torn. His face was bruised. Dried blood crusted around his temple. A forest ranger's badge still hung from his chest, cracked, dirty, but still pinned. He was barely conscious. His lips moved, but no sound came out. One of the dogs sat beside him immediately, placing a paw on his leg, whining low and steady. The other stood between the man and the woods, guarding like a soldier on duty. The handler shouted for backup. But deep down, he knew this was no accident. This was not a missing person. This was something else. The chains were thick, industrial, not the kind you find in a ranger's truck. And whoever left him there had not meant for him to be found. What had this man seen? Why had no one reported him missing? And why did the dogs sense danger before the humans did? The air grew heavy as more rescue members arrived, their boots crunching on dead leaves. But the K9s remained locked in position. One pressed tightly to the ranger's side, the other scanning the tree line like something still lurked nearby. The handler crouched beside the unconscious man and gently touched his wrist. There was a pulse, faint, but steady. His eyes fluttered open for a second, and he whispered a word so broken it was almost missed. Poachers. The handler froze. The others looked at each other, confusion quickly turning to alarm. No one had said a word about poachers in this area. The trail they were following was based on a wildlife distress signal, not a human emergency. The dogs had picked up something no tracker, no drone, no satellite had caught. They had led them to him. The handler gently cut through the chain with bolt cutters, trying not to wince at the way it had bruised the man's skin. The ranger's hands were trembling, fingernails cracked and bloody. His voice barely rose above a whisper, but his eyes were pleading. They know. I saw. They were killing them. The bears, the cubs. For money. It hit them all at once. This man had stumbled onto something bigger. Illegal wildlife, killing in federal forest territory. He had seen it. He had tried to stop it. And they had chained him like an animal, hoping nature would finish what they started. But they had not counted on the dogs. As the medics began loading the ranger onto a stretcher, one of the German shepherds refused to leave his side. The other kept pacing around the tree, nose buried in the dirt, digging. Then he barked. Short, sharp, urgent. The handler rushed over and saw it. A torn piece of camouflage cloth. Bloodstained. Still fresh. Whoever had done this had been nearby, and they were not far. The handler gripped the cloth in his gloved hand, the blood still damp. His heart pounded louder than the rustling leaves. This was not just evidence. It was a message. Whoever had done this was close. Maybe even watching. He scanned the tree line, but saw nothing. The forest was still, almost too still. No birds. No movement. Just the weight of something unseen pressing against every breath. One of the K9s let out a low growl and stood in front of the stretcher as if sensing a threat. The ranger, barely able to keep his eyes open, reached out and grabbed the handler's wrist with more strength than anyone expected. There are more, he whispered. They took the tracker, the cub's collar. GPS. Illegal zone. Southeast. The words barely made sense to the others. But the handler understood. The poachers were not just killing animals. They were using park-issued collars to track wildlife and lure them into kill zones. The ranger must have found their base, and instead of silencing him with a bullet, they chose something worse. They left him to die in the woods. Quiet. Erased. The medic looked up. We have to move him now. If the internal bleeding gets worse, we might lose him. The handler nodded, but his mind was racing. Something about this was bigger than a single crime. It was organized. Funded. Hidden behind shadows and green-painted lies. He looked down at the dogs. They were still on edge. And that was all he needed to know. He gave a short command. Track. The younger of the two shepherds sprang forward and took off through the brush, nose low to the ground. The handler followed, motioning two rangers to come with him. The other dog stayed beside the injured man, unmoving, eyes locked on the woods like he was daring someone to come closer. After a few hundred yards, the shepherd stopped. There, tucked behind a fallen tree, was a trail cam. Hidden. Smashed. But not enough. The SD card was still inside. And whatever it held was worth trying to kill a man for. The handler carefully removed the SD card, slipping it into a protective case. His fingers trembled, not from fear, but from instinct. He had seen cover-ups before. Accidents that were not accidents. Files that went missing. Reports that never made it to the public. But this felt different. This felt personal. The dog beside him let out a soft huff, circling the area once more before returning to his side. The broken trail cam had been aimed directly at the clearing where the ranger had been found. It had not just caught animal movement. It had caught everything. They hurried back to the mobile command vehicle, where one of the techs loaded the card into a secure laptop. The screen flickered to life. Everyone stood silent as the footage began to play. The first few seconds were normal, deer crossing, tree branches swaying, a few birds. Then suddenly, headlights. A truck. Painted forest green to blend in. Not government issued. Two men stepped out. One carried a rifle. The other, a chain. And in the center of the frame was the ranger. Hands raised. No weapon. His mouth moved, but there was no sound on the footage. He pointed to something behind him, maybe trying to talk his way out. One of the men laughed. And then, without hesitation, they grabbed him. He fought. Briefly. But the second man slammed him against a tree, wrapped the chain around his waist, and locked it tight. They did not look rushed. They were calm. Practiced. Before walking away, one of them leaned in close to the ranger's face. And smiled. The screen froze. Everyone in the mobile unit stared. The handler's jaw clenched. He recognized one of the men, not by name, but by reputation. A former guide. Expelled for illegal trapping 5 years ago. Rumor was he never left the forest. Just started working off-grid. Out of sight. Off books. But always dangerous. The footage was time-stamped. It was less than 36 hours old. Which meant they are still out there, the handler whispered. And they think they got away with it. But what they did not know was that the ranger had survived. And the dogs had never stopped tracking. The forest grew darker that evening, not because of the setting sun, but because of what everyone now knew. This was not just about one ranger. This was about a silent war happening deep within protected land, where greed moved like smoke between the trees, and only those who knew the forest could see it. The handler stood outside the mobile command unit, the dogs at his side. Both alert, both waiting. He called in quietly to the state office, requesting clearance to pursue. The voice on the other end hesitated. "You have no arrest authority," they warned. "Wait for backup." But he knew better. By the time backup arrived, the men would be gone. The trail would be cold, and another ranger might vanish. He looked down at the shepherds. "We go quiet. We go now." He left one dog behind to guard the cabin where the injured ranger was recovering. The younger dog, faster and more aggressive, would go with him. They slipped into the trees like shadows. No lights, no sounds, just breath and instinct. The German shepherd suddenly slowed, nose twitching, ears forward. The handler crouched low. They had come upon something. Through a break in the woods, he saw it. A small clearing. Camouflaged tents. Animal pelts hanging from a rope line. Crates. Rifles. And men. 3 of them. Drinking. Laughing. Armed. Then, behind the tent, a sound. A cage rattled. The handler's eyes narrowed. There were cubs in there. Bear cubs. Crying. Alive. And then something else. Movement. Another ranger's vest. A woman. Bruised. Gagged. Tied to a tree. Barely moving. She had been taken. This was no longer a hunting camp. This was trafficking. He pulled out his radio, but paused. Static. No signal. He had one option. He whispered the command. The dog dropped to the ground. Then vanished into the darkness. Seconds later, chaos. Growling. Screaming. A yell. Then a loud thud. The handler moved quickly, cutting the woman's ropes while the dog circled back to block one of the fleeing men. By the time the smoke cleared, 2 of them were down. The third ran. But he would not get far. Not with a dog who never forgot a scent. The woman, barely able to speak, looked at the handler with tears in her eyes. "You came back," she said. "No," he replied. looking at the shepherd standing guard near the cubs, tail raised, chest proud. He did. The man who ran did not get far. The German shepherd, trained for pursuit and takedown, closed the distance in seconds. No barking, no warning, just swift, surgical movement. The man hit the ground hard, pinned beneath 100 pounds of muscle and justice. By the time the handler arrived, gun drawn but unused, the man was already whimpering, face in the dirt, too terrified to fight back. "Do not shoot. Please," he cried out, arms raised. It was not supposed to happen like this. We were just supposed to scare him. The handler grabbed him by the collar and yanked him upright. "Who gave the order?" The man hesitated. Blood trickled from his lip. His eyes darted around, searching for a way out that did not exist. Then he whispered something the handler could barely believe. "A park official from the top. Name is Bennett. Said the ranger had been snooping around too much. Said he needed to disappear quietly." The handler stepped back, heart pounding. Bennett. He knew that name. He had shaken that man's hand, attended meetings with him, seen him give speeches about preserving nature and protecting wildlife. And all this time, he was the one turning state forests into slaughterhouses, using his title to erase witnesses, laundering poached goods through fake rescues. He looked at the dog beside him. The shepherd's eyes were calm, but his body still buzzed with tension. They had almost gotten away with it. Almost. Back at the command post, the woman ranger was stabilized. The bear cubs were loaded into a rescue van. But the air had changed. This was no longer a local crime. This was a system. A betrayal rooted deep inside the very structure meant to protect life. The handler uploaded the footage. Every second, every face, every GPS mark. And then he called the only person he trusted at the state level, a retired canine handler turned wildlife advocate, now working with federal investigation teams. "We have everything," the handler said. "The dogs led us to it all." The voice on the other end paused, then replied, "Then you already know what comes next. Be ready." The handler looked at the forest once more. Because this time, they were not going to bury it. They were going to burn it all clean, with truth. By the next morning, the forest was crawling with movement, but this time, it was not poachers hiding behind trees. Federal agents had arrived by helicopter. Quiet. Strategic. No media. No public announcements. Just files, warrants, and quiet nods exchanged between trusted officials. The handler had stayed up all night, uploading evidence, giving statements, and watching the K9s sleep beside the medics like tired warriors. Bennett had not yet been arrested, but he had been informed, and that alone was dangerous. The handler knew men like him powerful, clean on paper, protected by silence and favors. People who knew how to disappear the truth before it reached the public. He also knew Bennett would not run. Men like that stayed in place, smiling in press conferences, while erasing every threat behind closed doors. But this time, the threat was not behind a door. It was walking on four legs, with a nose that never forgot. The handler approached the lead federal agent, handing him the final piece, a logbook found buried beneath one of the crates at the poacher camp. Names, dates, GPS tags, payouts, even internal codes linked to fake research programs. "This," the agent said, thumbing through the pages, "is enough to charge a whole department." The handler nodded. "Start with Bennett." By noon, the agents moved in on the state office. Bennett was mid-speech at a wildlife protection seminar, speaking about funding sanctuaries. Ironically, when they cuffed him in front of a stunned crowd, he smiled even as the cameras rolled, pretending it was all a mistake. But when the German shepherd walked into the room, wearing a service vest that read "Survivor," and locked eyes with him, Bennett's smile cracked, because he recognized that dog. He had ordered him euthanized 2 years ago after an accidental attack during a patrol that got too close to a trap site. But the dog had lived, had been reassigned quietly, and now had brought him down. Across the country, the footage was released to the public, not just of the arrest, but of the rescue, of the cages, the ranger in chains, the dogs refusing to back down, the woman sobbing as she held a bear cub in her arms. The nation reacted. Donations poured into wildlife centers. Policies were rewritten overnight, and retired K9s, long forgotten, were honored with medals. But none of that mattered to the handler. Because that night, as he sat on the cabin porch, both dogs curled at his feet, he finally felt something he had not felt in years. Peace. And as the stars blinked above the treetops, he whispered, You saved them all. The older shepherd lifted his head, blinked slowly, then rested it gently back down. No applause. No spotlight. Just loyalty and justice. Spring arrived softly in the mountains that year. The snow melted into streams that ran quiet between the trees. New grass pushed up through the earth. And for the first time in a long time, the forest breathed easy. The handler built a memorial near the clearing where the first ranger had been found. Nothing grand. Just a wooden bench, 2 plaques, and a carved line in the oak tree behind it. They did not speak, but they were heard. People came, not in crowds, just a few at a time. Some were rangers, some were families, some just brought flowers and left in silence. But almost everyone cried when they saw the photos of the dogs, of the rescue, of the eyes that refused to look away from suffering. The older German shepherd, the one who had started it all, moved slower now. His coat had faded to gray, and his bones ached in the cold. But he never missed a walk, never left the handler's side, and never once let his gaze drift from the woods he had once guarded with his life. One morning, the handler found him lying beneath the memorial tree. Still, peaceful, nose pointed toward the trees. He had passed quietly, with no sound, like a warrior who knew his battle was over. The handler buried him beneath a tree. The plaque above read, "Bravo, he found them. He freed them. He finished the mission." The younger dog sat beside the grave all night. And when the morning came, he stood tall, walked to the porch, and sat beside the handler, eyes steady, chest high. The torch had passed, and the mission lived on. From that day forward, the forest was never the same. Not because the danger was gone, but because the people had changed. Because a dog had reminded them what courage looked like. Because silence had been broken. Because kindness had fought back. And somewhere, deep in the trees, when the wind rustled just right, you could almost hear the echo of a chain snapping, and the footsteps of 2 dogs running free. The end.